After studying this module, you shall be able to know about the problem of inequality in India, learn the differences in regional inequality in India, identify the trends in inequality in India, evaluate the steps taken by government to eliminate inequality, and finally analyze the impact of budget of 2015 on economic inequality. Economic inequality refers to how income is distributed amongst individuals in a population, amongst countries, and amongst groups in a population. Michael Todorow and Stephen Smith describe inequality as disproportionate distribution, total national income amongst households in their book titled Economic Development. Economists generally think of three methods of measuring of economic disparity, that is, wealth inequality, income inequality, and consumption. The issue of economic inequality can implicate notions of equity, equality of outcome, and equality of opportunity. Economic inequality varies between societies, historical periods, economic structures, and systems. The term can refer to cross-sectional distribution of income or wealth at any particular period, or to the lifetime income and wealth over longer period of time. There are various numerical indices for measuring economic inequality. A widely used one is the Gini coefficient, but there are also many other methods. Some studies have emphasized inequality as a growing social problem. Too much inequality can be destructive because income inequality and wealth concentration can hinder long-term growth. Early statistical studies comparing inequality to economic growth had been inconclusive. However, in the year 2011, International Monetary Fund economists showed that greater income inequality or greater income equality, less inequality, increased the duration of countries' economic growth spells more than free trade, low government corruption, foreign investment, or low foreign debt. Let us now understand meaning of inequality, measurement, and its trends. According to Todorow and Smith, different measures of inequality are: number 1, Kuznets ratio. It is the ratio of incomes received by top 20% and bottom 40% of the population. Kuznets' hypothesis states inequality should follow an inverse U shape as development process progresses. It means that in the early phase of development, due to greater urbanization and industrialization leading to greater inequality, then after years a stage of inequality starts falling. 2. Lorenz curve. Lorenz curve is a graph depicting the variance of the size distribution of income from perfect equality. This means if cumulative percentage of total income received is plotted against cumulative percentage of population starting from the poorest the Lorenz curve can be represented as under: percentage of population. In the figure, the curve represents the Lorenz curve. The diagonal line represents the line of perfect equality. The more the Lorenz curve deviates from the perfect equality, the greater is the degree of inequality. If there is perfect equality in income distribution, Lorenz curve coincides with the diagonal line. 3. The Gini coefficient. It is an aggregate numerical measure of income inequality ranging from 0, that is perfect equality, to 1, that is perfect inequality. It is measured by dividing the area between the perfect equality line and Lorenz curve by the total area lying to the right of the equality line in the above figure. The higher is the value of the coefficient, the higher is the inequality in income distribution. The closer is the value to 0, the more equal is the distribution of income. We shall now throw some light on the trends in inequality in India. In the Indian context, consumption expenditure survey done by the National Sample Survey Organization, known as the NSSO, constitutes the most basic source of inequality measurement. These surveys are conducted on a regular basis and they cover a large number of households. Trends in income inequality in India have been as follows. Number 1. Historically, inequality level in terms of income, consumption and wealth in India during the 1950s was quite high. The average Gini index for consumption was in excess of 35, while for land distribution it was in excess of 40. After that, there has been a steady decline in these measures. 2. Inequality measures remained fairly stable in 1970s and 1980s. Greater urbanization during this period could have led to a very small increase in overall inequality. 3. The income share of top 1% did a turnaround in the 1980s decade after falling steadily for nearly 3 decades. This coincided with more pro-business orientation of economy and higher growth rate. 4. After the 1990s decade, the picture completely changed. The two major surveys conducted in 1993 to 1993-2000 showed that there was no significant increase in inequality. In fact, inequality among rural households showed a steady decline during this period. 5. The most recently available estimates show that in the year 2004, inequality had increased to 36.8 according to Gini index. The distribution information shows that while bottom 20% lost their consumption share, the rich 20% had over 45% of the consumption share. Therefore, the quintile ratio was around 5.75. This ratio fell to around 5.6% in 2010-11 and to 4.9% in 2011-12. This means that disparity has got reduced over the past decade on quintile ratio, which fell to less than 5 in 2011-12. On comparing this quintile ratio to other countries, it is seen that this ratio is quite low in India as compared to Brazil, which is 20.6, China, which is 10.1, Malaysia, which is 11.3, South Africa, which is 25.3, USA amounts to 8.4 as against India's 4.9 in 2011-12. We shall now discuss the causes of income inequalities in India. The causes of income inequalities in India can be grouped in 4 major heads. Let us discuss each one by one. First, the growth factor. As development proceeds, the earnings of different groups rise differently. The incomes of the upper income and middle income groups rise more rapidly than those of the poor. This happens in the early stages of growth through which India is passing through at present. The explanation lies in the shift of population from agriculture, which is slow growing sector, to the modern large industrial sector, which grows more rapidly. Again, there is this capital intensive nature of the development of modern sector. Since this absorbs less labor wages, form a smaller proportion of total income. Hence, the income spread is not wide enough. On the other hand, the capital intensive type of growth leads to concentration of income in those few hands who supply capital. Number 2, highly unequal asset distribution. Incomes are mainly derived from 2 main sources, that are land and labor. In India, a few own large chunk of income earning assets. Some others who do not own or own a part of the assets they operate organize finances through banks, cooperatives, etc., and acquire or hire productive assets. These inequalities enable the few to get incomes in the form of rent, interest, and profit. As for rural areas, the ownership pattern of most of the important asset, namely land, is highly unequal. The marginal households with holding less than 1 hectare, which account for as many as 72% of the rural households, own very little, that is about 17% of the land only. On the other end, there are those with large holdings of more than 10 hectares who are about 1% of the rural households, but they have under their ownership as much as 14% of the area. Private ownership of property and inheritance laws is mainly responsible for highly unequal distribution of assets. The third point is inadequate employment generation. People at the bottom could raise their economic status and to an extent reduce the distance separating them from those at the top. If they could get work, in other words, if they did not possess adequate earning assets, they could at least earn from their labor. But there too, the situation was not favorable. For long, the increase in employment opportunities remained less than the rise in the labor force. Let us now discuss the fourth point, that is differential regional growth. Of the large many at the bottom rung of the incomes, a very great proportion lives in the poor backward states or regions, and most of the few at the top live in the high income states regions. This is the geographical facet of income inequalities for the country as a whole. Within the states also there are inequalities, perhaps larger in the poorer states. Both these aspects are the outcome of the different growth rates of the states, with a few having growth at fast rate and many having lagged behind. Let us now understand distributional impacts of budget presented in the year 2015. Changes in taxation policies in budget 2015 have also led to many impacts on the distribution of income. These taxation policies include widening of standard income tax bands, reduction in property tax rates for about half of the local authority areas, including large urban areas, which will impact more than half of the total households. Increase in standardized child benefit payment, increase in living alone allowances, revision in water charges. However, studies show that overall impact of budget 2015 on household incomes is close to neutral. The largest losses have been for the lowest decile of the population. Losses are incurred in each of the bottom 6 deciles, with the percentage loss declining as income increases. The fiscal drag experienced by the people who work would be very high, as more of their incomes would be taxed at higher rates, and people depending on welfare payments would experience a fall in their incomes below average. The net impact of budget is negative for low income groups, with the greatest loss about 1% for households with the lowest incomes. There are small gains for high income groups due to income tax reductions, with a gain of 0.6% only for the highest income group. Let us now discuss income distribution in India and make a comparison with other countries and amongst different states. A common criticism of India's growth story has been that it is very unequal. The rich get richer while the poor get poorer. As we move towards the higher levels of development, casual observations confirm just how unequal incomes are in the country. For example, what the average driver or servant earns in a year is often less than what the average middle class professional earns in a month. But does this mean that India is highly unequal country? Are the poor not benefiting from high economic growth? And how does India's inequality stack up against the income inequality in other countries? At first, India may seem to be a highly unequal country with regard to income distribution, but the picture is not as dark as it seems. If India is compared with other countries, a useful measure is the ratio of the average income of the richest 10% of the average income of the poorest 10%. Effectively, how many times greater is a rich person's income compared to a poor person's income? For India, this figure is 8.6. That is, the income of the richest 10% is 8.6 times higher than the income of the poorest 10%. Compared to most countries, it is actually on the low end of the scale. For example, the US figure is 15.9. For the UK, this figure is 13.8. For China, this figure is as high as 21.6. And for Brazil, this figure is phenomenal, being 40.6. Compared to these three countries, India's income inequality is considerably lower. The country with the lowest inequality in income is Japan, for whom this figure is as small as 4.5. The most unequal countries by this measure are primarily in Africa and South America. These statistics tell us that while India does have considerable income inequality, most other major economies have higher income inequalities. In particular, other emerging economies have much higher income inequalities. Another way we can analyze income inequality in India is by looking at different states. As we know, some states are considerably richer as compared to the other states of India. But are the poorer states getting richer? The richer states, for example, those with the highest average income per person, include Maharashtra, Delhi, Haryana, Goa, Gujarat, and Punjab. The poorer states include Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Manipur, and Nagaland. The poorest of these states is Bihar. The state with the highest growth rate in income per person in Bihar, the growth rate in income per person is Bihar, also the poorest state. Most of the poorer states have growth rates that are sometimes higher or roughly equal to the growth rate of the country as a whole. The only exceptions are states with political problems such as Kashmir and some states in the northeast, where growth remains well below the average. Compared to other major economies, India's income distribution is less unequal than others. Furthermore, many of the poorer states in India have high growth rates implying eventual convergence. What is important to point out is that income inequality is a relative measure only. It is not about absolute income levels. Poverty is still widespread in India, and that is a problem that needs to be solved over time. The gap between rich and poor is greater in the US than in India. However, the poor in India are much worse off as compared to the poor in US, and this is the important distinction to make. Let us learn the meaning of inequality and social welfare. There are many reasons why relative inequality is of great concern for a country like India. Inequality amongst the poor is a critical factor in understanding the severity of poverty and the impact of market and policy changes on the poor, But inequality amongst those above the poverty line is also a matter of concern. Todrow and Smith cite three main reasons why inequality poses a challenge for the development process of the Indian economy. Let us discuss these three one by one. Number one, extreme income inequality leads to economic inefficiency. When low income individuals cannot borrow money, they generally fail to educate their children or to invest in any kind of business. With high inequality in income, the overall saving rate in economy tends to be very low, as the main class which saves a huge part of their income is the middle class. Income of the richer class is basically spent in the form of capital flight. Such savings and investment do not add to nation's productive resources. In fact, they act as a drain on national resources. Therefore, if there is a huge inequality in the distribution of income, there is inefficient allocation of assets amongst different classes of the population. 2. Inequality leads to social instability and affects solidarity. High inequality strengthens the political power of the rich and hence their economic bargaining power as well. There is inefficient allocation of resources in favor of the rent-seeking behavior of the rich and away from productive purposes. With high inequality, the focus of politics often tends to support redistribution of the economic pie rather than to increase its size. 3. Extreme inequality is generally unfair. If everyone receives the same income, there would be little incentive for working hard, gain skills, or for innovation. As a result, most people generally vote for some inequality of income to the extent that these correspond to incentives for hard work and innovation. Welfare is a function of income per capita, Y, inequality I, absolute poverty P, that is W is equal to F Y into I into P. Income per capita is positively related to the welfare function and inequality and absolute poverty being negatively related. All the three components have their distinct significance and need to be considered separately while assessing welfare in developing countries. Let us understand and see the steps taken by the government to reduce income inequalities in India. The government of India, since the time of independence, has taken many measures and many steps to reduce inequalities of income in the country. These are: number 1, land reforms. Land reforms were introduced in the rural sector to reduce inequalities of income, especially with regard to the ownership of land. There were many land reforms that were undertaken, like ceiling on land holdings, ownership rights to tenants, tenancy reforms among others. Zamindari system was abolished and excess land left over was redistributed amongst landless labor. However, land reforms were not able to achieve the objectives set out for them. Therefore, the conditions of landless labor and tenants are still the same, giving rise to inequalities in income. 2. Development of small scale and cottage industries. During the planning process, government has also encouraged the development of small and cottage level industries. As these industries are mainly run in the rural areas, they help in reduction of regional disparities of income between rural and urban areas. With the development of these industries, poor people get a chance to enhance their income. 3. Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act. The Government of India passed the Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act, normally known as MRTP Act 1969, to check the concentration of urban property and economic power via the process of industrial licensing. However, due to internal deficiencies in the system, this act was not fully successful in achieving the objectives of reduction in economic power. 4. Employment and wage policies. During the 5-year plans, the government passed many programs for the creation of employment opportunities, such as the drought-prone area programs, Integrated Rural Development Program, National Scheme Training for Rural Youth for Self-Employment, the Jawahar Rozgar Yojana, etc. Minimum Wages Act and Bonus Act were also passed by the government for improving the economic conditions of the labor. 5. Public Distribution System. PDS was also started by the government so as to provide the food grains and other necessary products like sugar, kerosene at subsidized prices to the people living below poverty line. However, due to corruption and other deficiencies, the system of PDS was a big failure in achieving the redistribution of income from richer class to the poor class. 6. Fiscal Policy. Fiscal policy of the Government of India includes the taxation system as well as the public expenditure policies. The government has so designed its taxation policy so that the richer class of people have to give away a larger part of their income in the form of taxes to the government, which means the taxation system follows a progressive pattern. The public expenditure policy of the government also aims at redistributing income with the help of subsidies and social security benefits. 7. Measures to correct regional imbalances. The government has also taken many steps to reduce disparities in income among various areas. These are greater share in national income to backward states, central government financial assistance to the backward states, special area programs like drought-prone area programs, desert development programs, etc., special facilities for industrial development in backward states, tax concessions or tax subsidies to industries developed in backward regions. We shall now recapitulate what we have learned so far in this module. Number 1. Economic inequality refers to cross-sectional distribution of income or wealth at any particular period or to the lifetime income and wealth over longer periods of time. 2. Inequality can be measured with the help of many measures like the Kuznets ratio, the Lorenz curve and the Gini coefficient. 3. Trends in inequality in India show that in the early years of independence, inequality was quite high. However, with higher levels of development, inequality has come down. 4. Main causes of inequality in India are related to growth employment opportunities, asset distribution, and differential regional growth. 5. Budget presented in the year 2015 has caused no major impact on incomes of low as well as high income groups. However, working class people might experience some effect on their incomes. 6. On measuring the inequalities existing in India with respect to other countries, it can be concluded that India is less unequal country as compared to other countries. Among different states, Bihar is the poorest state but has the highest growth rate in income per person. 7. Inequality also affects social welfare negatively as it leads to economic inefficiency. It affects social stability and is generally unfair and unjust. 8. Government has taken many measures to reduce income inequalities in India, such as introduction of land reforms, development of small scale industries, introduction of MRTP Act, public distribution system, fiscal policy, and reduction of regional imbalances.